Hi, my name is Benedict. Today's video is going to be a short one for me. Mostly what we're looking at is how to do something that's going to have a bigger impact on your music than you initially realize. And that is looking at making more complex or more interesting modulations. Now, that doesn't have to be, when I say the word complex, it doesn't mean lots of layers of, because I really don't like doing that kind of stuff. But just to step past the obvious. So we'll start with here's sound. It's not about whether you like this sound, whether it's your style or genre of sound, but here is a sound. It sounds nice. It sounds organic, there's movement, it flows well. So how do we get here? What are the unique features of what we've done? What I've done. Now you'll see a device in the middle, and that is going to be a factor. Let's break it down for the moment. We start with a Thor. I've deliberately kept this quite simple, so you're not looking at 300 layers of modification, but really just kind of one. There's a tiny bit of envelope. So see how that little bit of movement, you kind of don't notice it, but at the same time, it just stops that sound from being so straight. Single oscillator is very easy to go, oh, well, we'll line up 300 oscillators. And that's a cool enough sound, but it's not the sound we're looking for. So it's how to take the purity of a single oscillator sound and really make it feel lively. Easy to say, okay, we'll whack on choruses, which is like the doubling that I just showed you. And I've added a chorus, which is actually this. Kind of not the nicest thing, but you'll see that where it was mixed was right down inside the mix. So we're looking for transitioning this, which is quite samey, by putting a little bit of something stronger in there. It's constantly moving around. So that flange that's inside it, even though you don't immediately identify that it's there, you're not listening to it and go, oh, look, that's a flanged sound. That little bit of movement gives a sense that, hey, this instrument's moving around a little bit. It seems more organic. The next one's delay. We can add layers of reverbs and all kinds of things, but one of the problems is that it kind of just overdoes it. So now I'm a bit of a delay king. I like lots of delay. But at the same time, it can very much get in the way of the purity of a sound. So you can have your delay, and it's quite a fast. But we'll turn that down. So the mod is doing a fair bit, but it's staying right down in the mix. So you can just hear it. Please do not do that with headphones, because it's virtually impossible to work out spacing, balancing, especially of things like reverbs in cans. No doubt you get used to it, but it's not the smartest thing to be doing. So we're filling our sound out without making it obvious that we're filling our sound out. Very flat. Gives a sense of dimension. gives movement that we don't really realize is there, but nonetheless, there's a little timbral or frequency movement inside the body of that instrument. The next thing we would traditionally look at here is some kind of LFO. So a vibrato is the obvious thing that we might do to that. So let's just pick up our LFO 1, whack it to our pitch. And that's nice, but it's very regular. I'm going to show you something different. The whole idea with this video is to say, let's step past the ordinary. So we'll bring in a CV. If you're not a Reason person, there's probably another way to bring modulation in from somewhere else. Somewhere else, your business, where you get it from. And that in this case, I'm using pulsar, flying the LFO to an input here. So LFO is going from there to here. You'll see I'm doing it twice. So I'm going to show you two different things. Should I put my vibrato back? It's nice, but it's very regular. What if we took our very regular LFO shape, and in the sense that it's always and only ever doing this, what if we took it and made it do something different? I'm not going to get into this because, to be honest, I find this application a little beyond me. Not because anything it does is bad or wrong, it's complex. But what I've done is I've taken the input and processed it through this. If I was not doing anything to it, this line would look like this. It would be straight. In other words, what goes in goes back out. But in this case, what comes in gets goofed with in that way. Versus now the LFO, because it's very even, we can start to sort of dismiss it. The sound actually starts to seem flatter, which is a shame because we put some time into making this nice sound, and then after a little while it starts to feel. You could add another LFO doing something similar to the same parameter to wander it about a bit, or you can put it through a process that mucks with the shape. Just basically takes it off being perfect and makes it different. So if you listen to that, the difference is subtle. And if you gave people a basic A-B, virtually nobody would tell the difference. If you said, well, which is a different shape, I think you'd find there was no real response, that science would say, oh, yes, we can tell one from another. However, I think that if you ask people which sounds nicer, which sounds more engaging, then I think we would actually have this one win. I don't really understand how this works, which is a shame. Alien Seed behind Cron, which I love and also find I struggle with. This one, it does an awful lot. One of the problems is I find it hard to know what it does. I know it's got help screens, but I don't want to be reading help screens. I want to just go, oh, that's how it does that. That's how I can control it. But it doesn't really matter, because a lot of people will look at this device or similar devices and say, but why would I want them? Because I've got Pulsar, which will send out all the basic shapes. Why would I need anything else? This is my point here. My real point here is that comparing this, nice, but just kind of flat compared to this. The lack of perfect regularity matches the real world far better. A heartbeat is quite regular, but you know what? It is not metronome regular. It moves around. Sometimes they actually call double beat. That can be a bit of a problem, but it's got a lot of variety. As I get more excited, it speeds up. It might even pause for a moment when I get... As I get more comfortable, it can slow down. It's constantly moving and changing. So our shape here is far more interesting. We could say, and there would be some people who would say, well, don't do that. You don't need that. You can just do this. Let's take our rate. And that's cool. But the problem you probably start to notice quite quickly is that we've got the first LFO doing this, we've got the second one doing this, and because their patterns are so regular, it's kind of same. We've moved our issue, but we've only moved it back in time by a few seconds before the brain works out, you know what, it's just another sine wave or another triangle wave. If we make it less noticeable, maybe, but it's still kind of flat. We take the very same process that we've got, put it back through the mess up the shapeonator, again it comes alive. So the whole point of this is not to say, buy that device, buy this device, buy any device. I don't want to buy any... I don't want you going off and buying any devices at all, to be perfectly honest, although this is going to do the job for you. But to think in terms of, rather than taking one dimension and doing the same thing over and over and over and over and over and over and over, to say, okay, I'll take that dimension, but how can I make that a bit more varied? So that's using Thor. Let's see what would happen if we used Europa. Europa is a great synth, but it's prone to sounding quite digital. But it's got all these envelopes. So we've got this fellow here. We've got our assignment there. Let's assign We don't need to double do this, so we'll pick an envelope. Let's pick envelope 1. It's here, it's already confabulating itself. Let's assign it to the filter as we do on the other one. Just hear the difference here already. Sounds kind of flat. Yes, we can assign it, but it's so regular. But hear how as soon as we've offset this, it sounds better than a perfectly regular wave. So the trick is to say, how can I make my LFOs and other modulation waves and sources less perfect, less regular? We could, of course, just go, okay, let's do this. And that's working. It really is. So we could go through and create that movement suddenly transforms it from being a fairly flat digital synth to analogy. Let's not get into the digital analog thing because most of it's just a... But we've got a depth and movement in this sound as a result of using an unusual modulation shape, an irregular modulation shape. Again, doesn't have to be super complex. Hear how that sounds better the moment I move that point down. I can move it anywhere. Very regular. So we get used to it and start to turn it off in our brains. It's got a kind of a lurch in it. Really nice sort of flute sound. Now this actually matches what a real player does. If we could get Ian Anderson of Jethro Tull to stand here and we were to record him, standing on one foot of course, wouldn't be respectful otherwise. If we could record Ian Anderson, Jethro Tull, tooting his flute, and actually look at how he's creating his vibrato, because he has to do it with his lips. Ew. We would actually find that his vibrato would not look like that. It would actually look more like this. Or it might look like that, or that. But I do know for a fact that vibrato and similar sorts of things applied by human beings is actually not perfect wave shapes. They are often skewed forward or backwards. So they're uneven. That's before we get into the fact that they probably come on a little slow and speed up, and then maybe slow down after they've been doing it for a while, or they speed up and slow down to match the content of the music, any of those sorts of things. If we ignore any of those sorts of things, just the fact that Ian's standing on one foot, tooting his flute, we ask him to vibrato on and off. Nothing complex, just start vibratoing, stop vibratoing, we would find that once he got into that vibrato, his wave shape that he's creating for that vibrato is going to be this. We might think it's this. And synth manufacturers will tell us, oh yes, that'll be that, that's what you're looking for. But the reason that the Moog modulars had like 11 billion knobs all over them was not actually so that they could make, 1,200 oscillators all at once. No, it was actually so that they could constantly be moving and bending the waves. Their sawtooth oscillator actually isn't a sawtooth at all. Barely looks like one. I don't know why they called it a sawtooth. It's bloody awful, technically. And yet, it does a beautiful job. It largely does a beautiful job because unlike this sawtooth here, which is too perfect, its brokenness actually gives us a nicer sound, which we can do here with the saw triangle. Yeah, that softens up. So our sense of imperfect waves for a flute, that's quite nice. It's given it some belly, got plenty of that now, and a little bit of up high. Sounds horrible there. We might go with a 12 dB, or we might not. No, we'll go back to the ladder. Gets quacky. There it is. Ooh. It's like you can hear Ian blowing across the breath hole on his tootenums. I'm getting excited now. I wasn't going to go over any of this, but I have got excited, so. Bloody brilliant. I'm in Cairns, so again, I got no sense of whether this is right. It's not about saying how to make this sound to make it perfect, but the sense that we might not even want that in that. Hear how our sound, same sound, when it goes flat. So, the real key and the trick in all of this, you might think, oh, but you showed me a whole lot of stuff. Yeah, I've shown you really one thing. I've just shown you different ways of applying it, is that you'll start with an oscillator or an LFO shape that's tidy. Please don't stop there. That's just a starting point. God gives you the basic waves to start with. He then gives you lots of ways to make them individual. Rub them up against each other so that they get uniqueified. So that. And that. So we've taken, you can create your own waves in something like Europa, or you can put them through a processor using something like Hermes or Cron, one of those things where you take a waveform in, uniqueify it, spit it back out the other side. Wave goes in, stuff happens to it, wave goes back out. So once we've made it non-linear, that very simple wave, rather than needing to do millions of post-processing things, which while people go, oh, but it's mixing, man, and it's like producing, it's not what you want to be doing as much as possible. Eric Clapton's a good guitarist because Eric can walk in, he knows what the song's about. He can put the right thing on tape first time. So the mixing process for the engineer is not a case of saying, oh, shit, that Eric guy, he sucks. How can I make him sound okay? It's a case of like, I've got something great on tape. How do I get that forward? How do I get things that don't belong here out of the way and the things that make Eric's performance great right out in front on tape, which as you saw here with this, as soon as I'm hearing that sense of the air across the flute, I'm thinking, okay, how can I really bring that out? So if I were engineering and I'm hearing, yeah, you know, I can kind of hear that air going across the sound hole when Ian stands on one foot and plays his flute, that's going to sound great in the mix because it's going to cut through and clarify Ian's performance. So I'm going to look to find it, which is what I'm looking to do here by EQing. I know I'm using a synth here and I'm adding something that wasn't there, but it's essentially the same process of simply saying, okay, how can I get that in the performance? And that's what we've done. And in both cases, the performances have come alive from our saying, rather than using perfect shapes, let's offset them a bit. Let's just make them a little unique so that they don't flow perfectly. They flow with a hook, with a hitch. That hook, that hitch, is what gives you the feeling that is a far more lively sound than the very same sound with that perfect wave shape. So alter your core wave shapes, your oscillator wave shapes, which largely your filters and stuff are doing, but try to alter them before you're getting to the filter. Because if we just rely on the filters, we're going to feel like, oh, it's always the same. When you're beginning in synthesis, you always think, oh, it's the filter, that's all the sound comes from the filter. But I learned a while ago, and embarrassingly late as far as I'm concerned, that that's not what it's about. As I said before, there's great big Moog modulars with a billion knobs and buttons on them. Those knobs and buttons were actually all about the oscillator and not much about the filter. While the filter is the thing that the Bobster got famous for, The emphasis on the machine was actually more in here, doing most of your work there. And if you listen to really early work done with that type of synthesizer, so you're listening to Tonto, Mort Garson, people like that, you sort of go, I don't hear filters. I'm almost hearing sine waves for everything. That's because they weren't using the filters a lot. It's not to say they weren't there, but they weren't relying on them in that sort of everything has to sound like a TB-303 sort of sense that people came to in about 1990. The concept of what a synthesizer did, how it was worked, radically changed at that point, somewhere around 1990. And that's okay, but the problem is it became quite one-dimensional in the sense that everybody said absolutely everything cool that happens in a synth happens on that knob. And some of that knob, but really that knob. And as a result, we stopped and lost a lot of what we did know, what the Tonto guys goes, what the Larry Fasts knew, what the Wendy Carloses knew, which was you make your magic here, and then this is even better. So take your basic forms. It's still right that you have your basic forms. Make them do interesting things. That's the very nature of this synth here. Heard it before. It's now unique. Yeah, you'll probably pick up a lot of other synth flute sounds that are in that arena. But you know what? That synth flute sound is unique because it's not just a sawtooth going through another 24 dB low pass filter. It's actually got its own kookiness. And that's how you make your sound stand out. And it really does not matter whether you're doing stuff that sounds like mine, whether you're doing stuff that's retro wave, pop, wubstep, trap, doesn't matter what you're doing. Put the focus into taking away from that, I'm going to do exactly the same safe, regular thing that absolutely everybody else is doing, because it's not. It's going to make you forgettable. You might get a couple of likes faster, but that's just going to be basically somebody saying, oh, will you remind me of somebody else? You don't want that. Really don't want that. Does Eddie Van Halen want to spend his life being compared to Jimi Hendrix and, say, Malmsteen? No. Eddie Van Halen would have wanted to spend his life being like, you're Eddie Van Halen. There's no one like you, Eddie. And it's not about ego as such, although it's part of it, but it's because if we spend our time trying to be somebody else, a second-rate somebody else, how many Malmsteens are there? There's really only one. There are plenty of people who've tried to be him, but how many of them can we name? Unless you spend a lot of time watching garbage on YouTube, your answer should be just about zero. There are people who might start in their bedrooms by listening to Malmsteen go, but as they progress and grow and they start to say, then we should end up with somebody who's unique. Who those people would be, I don't know. Misha Meyer, maybe. Doesn't matter. But they shouldn't be Malmsteen clones going, Malmsteen uses that shape, so I'll use that shape because that way I'll become just like Malmsteen. It's just like, fuck off. So, if you're looking at a device like Hermes and going, why on earth would I want it? Up to you. But here's what it does. And that is, it can take a regular sound That's nice, but a little flat. Struggling to make magic of that in your mix. And without even really knowing what you're doing, just by making it look a bit bent. We've taken an ordinary sound and given it this great big sense of depth, which is a sense of magic which will reach out of the speakers, make your mixing job so much easier, because when you're mixing it, you'll not be going like, oh, how am I going to get this to come out of the mix? I'll have to turn it up, I'll have to over EQ it, and oh, maybe I'll have to add layers of, sidechain compression, multiband shit, and all that kind of stupidity. You'll have a lively sound. It'll leap out, and all you got to do is make sure that you don't let anything else get in its way. That's the real trick. You have a good day now.